The mask slipped for exactly 4 seconds. For seconds of raw fury flashed across Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas's face as Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett calmly placed a stack of financial documents on the witness table. For over 3 decades, Thomas had wielded the authority of the highest court in America like an unassailable shield, confident that his lifetime appointment made him untouchable. Now, as cameras captured every detail of his crumbling composure, the nation was witnessing the moment when constitutional accountability collided with judicial arrogance, and arrogance lost. Across from him sat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, a 44-year-old Texas Democrat whose legal expertise and unshakable moral courage had made her the most feared questioner on the House Oversight Committee. As a former civil rights attorney who had built her career challenging powerful institutions that claimed to be above accountability, Crockett possessed the unique combination of constitutional knowledge and courtroom instincts necessary to confront someone of Thomas's stature. Her calm, precise speaking style masked a laser-focused intellect that had repeatedly dismantled seemingly untouchable figures through meticulous preparation and devastating cross-examination. Today's joint congressional hearing on Supreme Court ethics reform would prove to be the arena where judicial supremacy met its match in legislative oversight, and where a justice who believed himself beyond reproach would discover that no one in American democracy is truly above the law. The congressional hearing room buzzed with unprecedented tension as Justice Thomas entered to defend the Supreme Court against what he clearly viewed as an assault on judicial independence. The packed gallery included constitutional scholars, civil rights leaders, and legal experts, all watching as one of the most powerful figures in American government prepared to justify his controversial conduct. Thomas's opening statement dripped with disdain for the entire proceeding. Members of Congress, I appear before you today not out of legal obligation, but out of respect for the dialogue between coordinate branches of government. However, I must express my grave concern about recent attempts to undermine the independence and dignity of the federal judiciary through politically motivated attacks disguised as oversight. His voice carried the weight of 3 decades on the nation's highest court as he warmed to his theme. The Supreme Court has operated under established ethical guidelines for over 2 centuries. These guidelines have served the nation well, ensuring that justices remain independent from political pressure while maintaining the highest standards of judicial conduct. Thomas's eyes settled on Crockett with unmistakable condescension. I am particularly troubled by proposals from certain members of this committee that would subject the Supreme Court to congressional micromanagement. Such proposals demonstrate a fundamental misunderstanding of constitutional separation of powers and a dangerous disrespect for judicial tradition. The accusation hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown down. Thomas had essentially accused Crockett of constitutional ignorance and institutional vandalism, confident that his judicial authority would intimidate her into retreat. Crockett's response was measured and deadly quiet. Justice Thomas, thank you for appearing today. I want to assure you that this committee's oversight role is not about undermining judicial independence. It's about ensuring that the American people can trust that our highest court operates with the same ethical standards we expect from every other branch of government. She paused, letting her words sink in. Perhaps we could discuss what those ethical standards actually require and whether your recent conduct has met them. The battle lines were drawn. The room fell silent as America prepared to witness a confrontation that would test the very foundations of judicial accountability. Thomas leaned forward with the imperious authority of someone accustomed to being the final word on constitutional matters. Congresswoman, with respect, your line of questioning reveals a troubling misunderstanding of how the federal judiciary operates. Supreme Court justices are not ordinary public officials subject to the same disclosure requirements as legislators or executive branch employees. His voice took on a lecturing tone that had intimidated countless attorneys over the decades. We operate under different ethical constraints precisely because our independence is essential to the constitutional order. The founders understood that judicial decision-making must be insulated from political pressure and popular opinion. Crockett remained perfectly still, her expression calm as she absorbed Thomas's condescension. Justice Thomas, I appreciate your constitutional analysis. But let me ask you about something specific. Over the past 20 years, you've received luxury vacations, private jet travel, and expensive gifts from wealthy benefactors. The total value of these unreported benefits exceeds $400,000. How does accepting such gifts protect judicial independence? The question landed like a precision strike. Thomas's confident expression flickered as he realized Crockett had come armed with specific figures rather than vague accusations. Thomas's face reddened slightly. I have always followed the guidance provided by the court's ethics officials. Any suggestion that I have violated my oath is both inappropriate and unfounded. Then let's examine that guidance, Crockett continued, pulling out a thick folder. This is the Supreme Court's own ethics manual, which clearly states that justices must report all gifts and benefits. It makes no exception for personal friendships. Were you unaware of this requirement? The direct challenge caught Thomas off guard. He had expected deference to his judicial authority, not this methodical legal cross-examination from someone who clearly understood constitutional law as well as he did. The ethics requirements are complex and subject to interpretation, Thomas protested, his earlier commanding presence beginning to crack under Crockett's relentless pressure. Complex. Crockett's voice sharpened. Justice Thomas, you've spent 33 years interpreting complex legal language. Are you telling this committee that you couldn't understand a simple disclosure requirement that every federal judge in America manages to follow? The gallery stirred as Thomas struggled to respond. His reputation for intellectual rigor was being systematically demolished by someone who refused to be intimidated by his judicial status. The moment that shattered Thomas's defenses came when Crockett reached for a second folder, this one bearing the seal of the Financial Disclosure Office. Thomas's eyes locked onto it with visible panic, sensing that his carefully constructed justifications were about to crumble. Justice Thomas, I want to discuss your relationship with Harlan Crow, the Dallas real estate magnate who has provided you with numerous luxury vacations and gifts over the past 2 decades, Crockett said, her tone shifting to something more prosecutorial. She opened the folder with deliberate precision. Mr. Crow has business interests that have appeared before the Supreme Court in various forms: tax cases, real estate disputes, regulatory matters. Were you aware of these interests when you accepted his hospitality? Thomas's composure began to fracture. Mr. Crow is a personal friend who has never asked me to intervene in any case. That's not what I asked, Crockett interrupted smoothly. I asked whether you were aware of his business interests that could be affected by Supreme Court decisions. Because according to these financial disclosure forms, Mr. Crow's companies have had matters that reached your court at least 12 times since 2003. The revelation sent shockwaves through the room. Even Thomas's supporters looked stunned as the scope of the potential conflicts became clear. A private family matter involving a Supreme Court justice receiving substantial financial benefits from someone with business before the court, Crockett corrected. Justice Thomas, how is this different from ordinary corruption, except that you have lifetime tenure? The question hung in the air like an indictment. Thomas sat frozen, unable to answer as the weight of his ethical failures became undeniable to everyone watching. What happened next would be remembered as the most devastating judicial accountability moment in American history. Thomas, cornered and desperate, made the fatal mistake of abandoning his judicial dignity in favor of raw political defensiveness. This is exactly what I expected from this committee. Thomas exploded, his voice rising to a near shout. You people have spent years trying to destroy the legitimacy of the Supreme Court because you don't like our decisions. This is an oversight. It's a political hit job designed to intimidate conservative justices. The outburst was shocking in its intensity and partisan nature. Cameras captured every second as the most powerful judge in America abandoned all pretense of judicial neutrality and revealed himself as just another angry politician. Crockett remained perfectly calm, letting Thomas's fury fill the room before responding with devastating precision. Justice Thomas, thank you for that response. You've just demonstrated exactly why this oversight is necessary. Her voice grew stronger, more authoritative, as she delivered what would become the most quoted moment of her political career. For 33 years, you've sat on the Supreme Court making decisions that affect every American. You've dismantled voting rights, eliminated affirmative action, and restricted reproductive freedom. Throughout all of this, you've claimed to be an impartial interpreter of the Constitution. She gestured to the evidence spread across the table. But what we've learned today is that while you were making these supposedly neutral legal decisions, you were receiving hundreds of thousands of dollars in undisclosed benefits from wealthy conservatives who had business before your court. Thomas tried to interrupt, but Crockett held up her hand and continued, her voice rising with moral authority. You violated federal disclosure laws, created conflicts of interest that would disqualify any other federal judge, and when confronted with evidence of your misconduct, you resort to political attacks and partisan rhetoric. She leaned forward, her eyes locked on Thomas with unwavering intensity. Justice Thomas, you have fundamentally corrupted the institution you claim to protect. You have taken the highest court in our land and turned it into your personal financial opportunity. You have betrayed your oath, violated the public trust, and damaged the legitimacy of American justice. The room erupted in gasps and shocked murmurs as the full weight of her indictment sank in. Thomas sat completely silent, his earlier fury replaced by the hollow expression of a man whose reputation had just been destroyed on live television. Crockett's final words cut through the chaos like a sword. The Supreme Court doesn't belong to you, Justice Thomas. It belongs to the American people. And today, they've seen exactly what you've done with their trust. The silence that followed was deafening. Thomas opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. For the first time in his career, the man who had spent decades having the final word found himself completely speechless. Within minutes, social media exploded with unprecedented fury. Hashtag Thomas Exposed and hashtag Crockett Destroys Thomas began trending worldwide as video clips of the confrontation were shared millions of times across every platform. The moment when Thomas lost his composure and resorted to partisan attacks became an instant symbol of judicial corruption meeting its match in congressional accountability. News networks across the political spectrum scrambled to cover the story. Even conservative commentators struggled to defend Thomas's performance, with several noting that his angry outburst had damaged his credibility and confirmed critics' worst fears about partisan bias on the court. Legal scholars praise Crockett's methodical demolition of Thomas's defenses as a masterclass in constitutional oversight. The impact extended far beyond politics into American legal discourse. Law schools began emergency discussions about judicial ethics and accountability. The American Bar Association called for immediate reforms to Supreme Court ethics rules. Several prominent conservative legal figures distanced themselves from Thomas, recognizing that his conduct had become indefensible. Congressional leaders from both parties faced immediate pressure to act. Democratic leadership hailed Crockett's performance as a watershed moment for judicial accountability, while several Republican senators privately admitted that Thomas's behavior had made their defense of the court untenable. The confrontation accelerated calls for Supreme Court reform that had been building for years. Within hours, over 40 House Democrats had co-sponsored new legislation requiring Supreme Court justices to follow the same ethics rules as other federal judges. In the days that followed, constitutional scholars would debate what had made Crockett's performance so devastating. Some pointed to her superior preparation and legal expertise. Others emphasized how she had maintained judicial temperament while Thomas had abandoned his. But the real power of the moment lay in its clarity. It had stripped away all pretense and shown the American people exactly what their Supreme Court had become. For too long, Supreme Court justices had operated as if their lifetime tenure made them accountable to no one. Thomas had embodied this arrogance, believing that his position placed him above the ethical standards expected of every other public servant. Crockett had shattered that entire framework by demonstrating that no one in American democracy is truly beyond accountability.